Hello, I am Jimena Hartzog, the co-founder of Fun to Action, and I look forward to sharing my story and how we started and grew Fun to Action at the Startup of the Year Summit. I hope you can join us.
All right, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us today. Welcome to Recapped with Established. I'm Rich Maloy, the VP of Engagement at Established and a partner at Springtime Ventures. And with me today is Allison Schneider, principal at E-Trade Ventures and Labs. Hi, Allie.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, awesome to have you here.
This is a great way to end the week.
Yes, yes, totally. Especially, did you know that it is the second Friday the 13th in 2020?
I heard the first Friday the 13th was it March 13th this year when really the pandemic really blew up.
Yes.
I think I saw something on Twitter saying, what could go worse this Friday the 13th? Because we already had a pretty bad one this year.
Totally. Yes, absolutely. Oh, man.
It's been a year.
It's been a year. Absolutely. Yes. Man, oh man. So, but so far it's been a good Friday the 13th. So fingers crossed.
Yes, I'll take it.
Yeah, totally. So, just by way of background, each week we hold office hours for startups in the Startup of the Year network, and the office hours are private so that the founders are comfortable sharing what's top of mind for them. But then we get together at the end of the week to talk about what is on founders' minds and share the advice that we shared with them with you, the viewer. So if you'd like to meet our mentors, well, you can, because our annual summit is next week. 100% free, 100% online, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday next week. We will have pitches from 50 startups. We will have talks from founders such as Mike Evans from Grubhub, Kara Golden from Hintwater, and more. We will have VCs such as Lo Tony from Plexo Capital, Tim Draper from all of the Draper things, and many, many more. And so please come and join us. It is, if you go to summit.startupofyear.com, let's find where chat is, and I'll put that in chat. There we go. I found the chat window. So please come and join us, 100% free, and you can come and build your schedule. And Allie, you're going to be one of the mentors meeting with some of the startups next week.
Oh, I'm so excited. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, that'll be great. It definitely will be a lot of fun.
I'm looking forward to it.
So we first met through IBM and two different IBM startup programs. I was on the cloud side and you were on the Watson side.
Mm-hmm.
And was it Techstars Boulder we first met, or did we meet in New York first?
I want to say maybe we met briefly in New York.
I think so.
But then I came out to Techstars Denver.
Yeah.
We were out and did some fun meetings and office hours and mentor sessions, I think over the course of a week. And that was my first time actually in Denver.
Oh, cool.
And it was such a tease because I feel like I just got to drive around a little bit, but I'm antsy to get back and actually explore.
Yes. Awesome. We should come back. Yeah, it's wonderful here. So, now you're at E-Trade Ventures and Labs, and that has been awesome. And so I imagine you get lots of questions about how startups can work with corporations. How do you handle that? How should startups handle that?
Yeah, I mean, so the way I think about my job at E-Trade really is to kind of be a chaperone or a Sherpa, right, for startups within E-Trade. And I think one of the reasons why I love my job, I actually joined E-Trade from the startup side.
Yeah.
So I was at a venture-backed startup in New York for a couple of years as their first sales and business development hire. And so I was selling into a lot of corporates and, banging my head against the wall and running into the same issues, right? The long procurement processes and the, millions of demo calls and, trying to find the right stakeholders. And it's interesting because when I had the chance to come to E-Trade, the reason why I took the role, honestly, was I said, I know what it's like to be on the other side of the table. And so maybe I can be a more effective partner for some of these companies within E-Trade. And so it's been a really interesting role because my job is really to identify and partner with startups within E-Trade to really, whether it's a problem we're already trying to solve at E-Trade and we're trying to go out into the ecosystem and proactively find some startups that are solving for that particular problem. Sometimes it's a little bit more of a push method. Sometimes it's a little bit more pull when startups are coming to me and say, hey, we'd love to work with E-Trade. We think we have some interesting use cases that could be relevant to you guys. Can you help kind of bridge the gap and make those connections there? And I think, I get a ton of questions. I think the first is like, how do I get my foot in the door, right? How do I identify the right people that I should be working with? And the thing I am constantly telling startups is you have to be patient, right? I think enterprises more than ever, right, realize that they need to work with startups to innovate, right? They need to bring these new technologies and products and teams in-house and partner with them or build with them or buy from them. But they take a little while to make decisions, and it takes a while to get the right stakeholders on board and to do those demo calls. And so really, I think getting a sense of what is an enterprise's process up front so that you know what you're in for and how to kind of navigate is everything.
How do you uncover what their process is? How should a startup go about doing that?
It's a great question. I mean, I think within reason you can ask, right? I think not enough founders that I talk to feel like they have the right to actually ask, what does your process look like? How do you make decisions? Where does budget come from? How do you prefer to run pilots? And the thing I always tell founders too is when you're trying to sell into an enterprise, right, you're starting by doing a bunch of different demos for different groups within an enterprise to see where you can kind of get traction, to see where there are use cases, to see where there's interest. And usually you have someone that's helping kind of guide you through the organization that's saying, I want to get you in front of this group. And then coming into that call, they say, oh, this team, so-and-so should see this too, right? For every demo or every call or meeting that you do, you've earned the right to ask for more information. Nice. Every person that you talk to, whether it's someone on the procurement side, right? What are the things that you like to see? What are some of the certifications? Do you like to have SOC? Do you need to have GDPR requirements, right? Every single meeting that you take and person that you talk to, you earn the right to ask those questions. And I think there's a way to do it where you're not, asking a million questions, right? And asking questions that are kind of getting ahead of yourselves, but you're allowed to have that information, and it makes the enterprise's job easier if you're asking that up front, because it helps set expectations for what the timeline and process will be on both sides.
I love that you've earned the right to ask more questions like that. That's fantastic. And that's a really great perspective and empowering for startups that may feel like, I'm the little startup trying to sell into big co. And so keep in mind that you've earned the right to ask more questions. I think a critical piece here is also you have to ask who else needs to see this.
Yeah.
Or what who ultimately signs the contract, right? And do I need to meet with them and understanding how that goes?
Totally. And I think. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say that. So we, for Establish, we also work with AFWorks, which is the innovation arm of the Air Force. And the Air Force makes it very cut and dry that you have to have a contract and you have to have funding. And those are completely different things. And I've never thought about it like that, right? And so you go to a company and you just think about that you just need to get somebody to buy it, right? But there's a whole nother world over there that's finance and legal and security that needs to check off all of these things, right? And so for working with the DoD, it's cut and dry. Here's your contract, here's your funding. And they're different departments, they're different people, different processes. And so I think that's a great lesson also for startups, is to treat it like that, is that your sales process is not the logistics of executing to get to the contract.
Totally. And the other thing, I was just talking to a startup about this last week, is you have to be a little flexible too. I think, especially when you're a startup, you want to go in with a plan, right? You want to come in and say, okay, this is ideally what we want to get out of this meeting, and we want to be prescriptive about next steps and what a potential pilot could look like. And I'm not saying don't do those things. Those are very important things to do, is come in with a point of view and come in with a plan, right? You want to make it easy for an enterprise. If they don't know what the next step should be, you want to tell them what you ideally think that they should be. But you also have to be flexible too. I've certainly seen scenarios where, a startup comes in a little bit too headstrong about what they think the process should be, and are not kind of flexible in terms of what the needs of the enterprise actually is. And that's where I think you can actually see some miscommunication if you're not really listening to how the enterprise actually goes about making decisions and what they need at a point in time. Because sometimes you don't like the answer, but doesn't mean that the answer is going to change necessarily. So you'd rather know. And then as a startup, you have the right to decide if you want to work with that company. I tell startups that all the time. If there's a company, an enterprise that you've been talking to for months and they're not giving you straight answers, or they're going quiet for a while, like there's a chance they could be working their internal systems and doing a lot of things in the back end and trying to make things move. There's a chance that there's just not a whole lot of interest. And so you have to kind of make that decision and make sure that you're using your time wisely. Because at the end of the day, you choose where you spend your time, and you have limited time, you have limited resources as a startup.
Yep, absolutely. And a great process for that for that is the takeaway. And a gentle, artful takeaway can do wonders, and it also can clarify that for you, right? And say, well, it seems like this isn't the right time to be engaging with you. Just feel free to reach back out when the timing is right, and that you feel like we can move this forward, right? And so I gave you a thing, and now I'm taking it away, but I'm leaving the door open, right? And somebody that's truly interested is gonna in most cases is gonna reach out and say, no. Really try to make this work, right? But if you get nothing back, then just move them to closed lost, and that's fine. No is the second best answer, is what we say at Springtime.
I couldn't agree more. I think hearing a no on the startup side, right? It gives you the freedom to say, okay, we're going to move forward.
Totally.
But to your point, you can always keep that door open. I always really appreciate it. I have a founder that we're not currently working with. I think there's potential for us to work with them down the line. And just last week, he, said, hey, I saw this article and thought of you guys at E-Trade. Some really interesting research on machine learning. And, that's a great move, right? It keeps you top of mind. You're providing value. It keeps the door open. Those types of kind of warm connections and touch points really do matter.
They're great. Sure. They're great. Absolutely. Totally. So one of the things, is that, so two other thoughts here, right? So one is that you have to ask, as a startup, do you have a specific process for working with startups? Right. And that is absolutely essential. And I shouldn't say it's essential, but it's an essential question, right? So many organizations can work with startups in different ways. But if they have a process for working with it, then it'll be easier. And if they don't, then just know you're going to be in for a longer haul.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I think in an ideal world, right, the corporate says, yes, we have a separate process for startups. We have a solidified process and condensed process for InfoSec and security reviews and whatnot. But in the case that the enterprise doesn't, I think the best thing that you can do as a startup, if it's a company that you really want to work with, my recommendation is always be really prescriptive about next steps, because I've definitely been on meetings in both sides of the table, on the corporate side or the enterprise side, where at the end of the meeting and both sides say, there's something interesting here. There's potential for us to work together. And both sides kind of look at each other and say, now what? What do we do? Like, what should we do next? Right? Should we have another meeting? Should we, right? So, and those meetings are painful, right? If neither side really knows what to do. So I think as a startup, if you do hear those words, like, we don't really know the best way to proceed. Okay, well, come in and have a point of view. I always really appreciate when a startup has that kind of last page in their deck ready to go or pull up that says, okay, here's what we propose, right? Whether it's a pilot or a POC, or just engaging like different teams of people to kind of find use case fits, have that kind of plan of action. And the corporate could say, no, that's not really how we do things here, but it'll open the conversation for the enterprise to say, if that's not how we do it, well, then how do we do it? Right. Here are some of the other things that might make more sense given our organization. So it might even just help jumpstart the conversation a bit more.
That's awesome. Yeah, totally. I love it. So then one other piece here, and then I would love to dive into the lab side as well.
Yeah.
But is when we were at IBM, I always told people, you need to make as many IBM contacts as possible if you want to work with this organization. Like, never stop making contacts. And oftentimes I would tell companies that, it's going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, if you're not exactly what IBM's looking for. But I feel like that's that way for any big organization is that just keep making contacts and keep reaching out to people, because people are in different departments doing the same thing. Startup programs in Cloud and Watson, for example, right?
I know when we met each other, we're like, wait, we kind of do the same thing at this company.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I met a bunch of other people that also had startup initiatives that had no idea that there were multiple other startup initiatives going on. And so, that was just one example, but for startups out there, like, you just never stop networking with an organization, and because you can never have too many contacts in that organization, because they'll change, they'll move, they'll get promoted, they'll get fired, they'll lose interest, they'll move on to a different project, budgets shift around. I mean, it's just a changing landscape. And so the more that you have your hooks into it, the better off you're going to be.
Totally. I mean, reorgs are so common. They happen all the time, right? And I think too, whether people are directly going to be involved in an engagement, right? Whether it's a POC or a partnership or whatever it looks like, whether they're directly involved in not having more stakeholders and people on your side is everything. They'll just be able to, people that can vouch for you at the end of the day and say, hey, we think what they're doing is interesting, whether we're involved or not.
And how many people did you meet in the IBM organization from startups saying, "Oh, do you know so and so?"
So often, I would talk to people. I was like in a role like you, where I was more externally facing. I was constantly talking to either startups or VCs that were saying, "Do you know this person at IBM? Do you know this person?" And I met the most interesting people at IBM through my external network.
Totally.
It's a big company.
It's a big company. It's a funny thing. Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about labs. I mean, I'd love to hear about E-Trade Labs and, what's happening there. Anything, that you could share along those lines.
Yeah. So I'm obviously very biased, but I think it's an exciting organization to be a part of. And, the way that we think about our role is, how do we help the E-Trade organization, which is now part of Morgan Stanley, which is exciting. We just completed the acquisition.
Yeah.
What's exciting about it is we focus on projects that are either business model forward or technology forward. And so it's very much a partnership with the different internal business units at E-Trade. Because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that the projects that we're working on are those that are most prioritized by the executive sponsors that will eventually own them.
Yes.
And so from a project perspective, our team, we're a really small cross-functional team, and we focus on getting those projects to MVP, right? Sometimes it's us building internally. Sometimes it's more of a partnership with an external partner. Sometimes it's more of a vendor relationship, or we're buying and testing new technology. And so I think the question that we always ask ourselves is, who are we building for, right? Who is the user? So design thinking methodology is a huge part of our practice to make sure we're not building for the sake of building. We're not experimenting with technology for the sake of technology. We're trying to use technology to solve important problems for the business. And, why the startup ecosystem is so important is, we're smart enough to recognize that it doesn't make sense for us to always build internally from the ground up. In most cases, it doesn't. There are really interesting companies externally for us to leverage. So the best part is, I think of my job is, if there are certain problems or use cases we're trying to solve for internally, is going out and saying, who's solving for those and who should we be talking to? Who should we be meeting and bringing inside and figuring out how to work together?
And so then how do you go out and when you go out looking for startups, how do you go find them? How do you go about finding those organizations?
It's a great question. I think a huge part of it, right, is ecosystem and community building, right? So having those kind of solid relationships in place outside of the organization has been paramount to us. So, as a team, when I first came into the role, we didn't have anyone that focused on ecosystem, the kind of startup and technology ecosystem before. And I said, okay, based on the types of companies that we're looking to meet and partner with, right, primarily enterprise tech and fintech, who are the right partners for us externally? Who are the VCs and the accelerators and the incubators that we want to build relationships with? Sometimes those are more informal relationships, right? Just folks that we make a point to stay in touch with and touch base with and trading companies back and forth, whether it's from an investment perspective or partnership perspective, keeping those relationships really strong so that they're constantly thinking of us and what we're looking for when they meet companies. So that's been a huge part of our strategy. And some of those have evolved into more formal partnerships as well. We work really closely with an organization in New York called Acceleprise, which is a B2B SaaS accelerator and fund across San Francisco, Toronto, and New York. And they work with some really amazing SaaS and enterprise tech companies.
Awesome.
Excuse me. So that's been huge for us.
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, the startup ecosystem is so fun and so exciting. So I'm surprised to hear that E-Trade didn't have anybody out in that role, but they found somebody great. So there you go.
That's very kind.
Yeah. So well, it's a fun job to be filling, for sure.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. You get to. I mean, I feel so lucky that I get to spend most of my days, working with amazing people internally and meeting with amazing founders.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the best.
What are some other pitfalls that you've seen, or advice that you've given to founders, within the context of what you've seen, in your role, without, in general, right? But what are some pitfalls that you've seen that you'd love to be able to share with founders so that they avoid those pitfalls in the future?
Yeah. It's a boring topic, but I spend a lot of time talking about meeting preparation. Because the reality is when you're trying to work with an enterprise, you're going to have to do a lot of meetings. Yeah. And the reality is, for better or for worse, like first impressions are really, really important. And so what I'll do, and I encourage startups to do this, whether they're, regardless of what enterprise they're selling into or trying to, right? They usually have a point of contact. I encourage them, companies that we want to work with to do it with me. I encourage them to do it with other enterprises that they work with too, right? Ask that point of contact to do a prep call with you before the meeting with, the big executive sponsors and C-suite folks, because you get one chance to get in front of those people and you want to make an impression. And so use your point of contact to ask them, like, who's going to be in the room? What is the right format? Should we spend time on slides? Should we get straight to the demo?
Totally.
And
do they like to interrupt, or are they going to?
Do they like to interrupt? Are they going to poke holes in everything? Yeah. How do they ask questions? They prefer to leave questions to the end, right? Ask those questions and come ahead of time. Send out the agenda to everyone. Everyone might not respond to the email. That's okay. Go over it quickly at the beginning and just check in.
Yeah.
Is this aligned with your expectations for the meeting today? Because even, that, CISO that you have been trying to get on the calendar with, he could say, I actually only have 15 minutes today. We got to get to the demo and ideally we wrap this up in 10 minutes. Right.
Totally.
And so ask that up front so that what you're working with from a time perspective in terms of the expectations and everything. Yeah. And it's amazing to me. I think the majority of people that I do talk to do follow that advice. And I can tell you that from the meetings that I've seen kind of go off the rails, it's typically when founders don't necessarily want to listen to that advice, right? They want to go through the 40-page PowerPoint deck. And I can tell you anything more than 5 slides to set up the demo is usually not relevant.
Yeah.
I can't iterate enough, just get to the demo.
Yes.
And how important that is.
That's great. I love it. Well, it's the Guy Kawasaki rule, the 10-20-30 rule.
Yes.
No more than 10 slides, no more than 20 minutes, no font smaller than 30-point font.
I do love that.
Yeah.
And it's true. It really is true. And I think, the more time that you can save for questions and discussion, right? That's what's going to make it an effective meeting.
Yep. And expect that people are going to be late. And so your 30-minute meeting after the key person is 5 minutes late, and then you spend 5 minutes, having some banter, which you need to have. And it's just part of being human, right? Is just oh yeah, well, we're just joking about Friday the 13th, right? But that sort of banter, you have to engage on a human level as well.
Totally.
And now you've got 20 minutes left, and and you'd prepared to 30 minutes, with time for Q&A, and what are you cutting out, right? And so I love that setting the agenda ahead of time, sending the materials ahead of time. Because people that are preparers and that like to read ahead will do that, and that's fantastic. And just assume that most
Assume that
people
they
don't.
won't.
Right. Assume that they don't. Right.
Right.
Don't shame people for not reading the deck that you sent, at midnight last night.
Right.
That's a little too late, but
That's so true. And I love what you said too. The other thing that I constantly feel like I'm telling people is don't underestimate how important professionalism is. I would say this all the time, actually, when we were doing back when in-person meetings were a thing. I would say to the startups that were coming to our office, like, it's a hard office address to find. Like, get here 20 minutes early, be in the lobby 15 minutes early. Because if you're not showing up to the office until the time that the meeting starts, by the time you get in the room and sign in with security and just assume it's going to take you 20 minutes longer than you think, then you're flustered, you're starting late, everybody's kind of annoyed. And I think it's the same kind of applies on virtual. Like, test out the conference room ahead of time, like log in 5 minutes early. There's nothing, as someone who facilitates a lot of those meetings, if I have senior executives waiting on a WebEx and the founder hasn't showed up yet, right? That's a poor reflection on me. And that's when I'm hysterical. Like, where are you? You got to be on here immediately. So I think there are enterprises out there that are, they get nervous about working with, younger, especially early stage startups. Don't give them a reason not to work with you because you weren't professional.
Right. Totally. Yeah. I want to come back around to what you said earlier, but you just having you talk about how a startup that you bring in being a no-show or late is a poor reflection on you, coming back to utilizing that point of contact and how critical that is, right? Because that person is invested in your success because they want to succeed with you, and you can succeed together. Now, their career doesn't hinge on you, but they're invested in you. And so leverage that and get on their calendar and show them the slides and show them the deck and ask them those questions and understand what you're walking into as much as possible. It's funny. Totally. I wear so many hats in the community, but I just finished giving a briefing, and and I was working with my point of contact extensively over the last day and a half, preparing for this, so that I was understanding what is this person's meeting style. That was one of my questions, right? Yeah. And are they going to be on time? Are they going to be late? Do they want a lot of stuff? Do they want a little bit of stuff? And how should we shape the message? And let's make sure that we've got the main stuff up front. And it was exactly that. They were running late to another meeting from another meeting. We had chit chat for a little bit, which was great, and enjoyed it. And it was the first we had a chance to meet this person. Dove in, drove hard, ran through, all the stuff, paused for questions. I talk fast, so I can get through a deck pretty quickly.
It helps.
But then we had a great conversation. All of a sudden he's like, oh my gosh, I just realized I'm late for my next meeting.
And I'm sure your point of contact that you've been working with over the past couple of days, like, sincerely appreciated the fact that you put so much time into working with him up front, because at the end of the day, like, that meeting went well. That's a reflection on him too, because he's so deeply involved. It is. It's
a great, So then he feels comfortable, continuing to recommend us as a partner. Mm-hmm. A lot of good stuff, a lot of good lessons there. So, so Allie, let's wrap up here. We're almost at half past, but I always like to end with, like, what is the most common piece of advice that you give to startups, that if you could just blanket this across the country to startups, what would it be?
Ooh. I do talk about meetings a lot. Good. I would also say, know what you're getting into from a procurement perspective as early as humanly possible. Because especially, in regulated industries like healthcare and financial services, right? Those processes internally are not going to change, and they exist for a reason, right? These are heavily regulated industries, so there's a reason why they're in place. And I think you, from a timing perspective, so that you can best plan and put together really a feasible timeline that allows you as a company to really say, okay, at what point will we feasibly be able to work with this organization? You want to know upfront what you're working with. And again, it comes back to asking those questions, right? Asking, what are the certifications that you require? Okay, SOC 1 and SOC 2 are important. We're not going to have those certifications right away. So what would we have to do in lieu of actually having those certifications, right? Are there going to be more internal conversations, or are there going to be specific check-ins that we'll need, right? So the more information is power. You never want to be going in blind, because then you can't realistically set expectations for your team, for your investors who are looking at your pipeline, right? You want those numbers and the pipeline to look real. So in order for that to be real, you have to really know what the real timeline you're working with these companies, especially if you're selling into big companies.
Yes, totally. Yeah. So follow on question to that is that what are the questions that startups should ask to understand the procurement process?
Yeah, I mean, I would ask first and foremost, like, who's going to be my point of contact there? Because often the person that is working with you in terms of selling into the organization is not going to be your InfoSec point of contact, right? So I would ask, who's the team that'll support? How early can I get an introduction to them? Does it make sense to review that process ahead of time? Do you have a sense of what that process looks like for POCs and pilots versus for a formal vendor relationship? Right? Are there certain NDAs and forms that you need in place ahead of time that we can start now? Usually an NDA can be done pretty early and in advance and kind of kickstart that vendor management process. So I think asking kind of the basic questions up front, and then as they start to give you more information, you can figure out when does it feel appropriate to start to drill down, but it can at least give you the background to start kind of planning, at least on your side, on the founder side, at what point should we kick off some of these activities?
Awesome. Great advice as always.
Not the funnest topic to end on is InfoSec, but it's very important.
I actually have a startup in mind that I'm going to send them the link to this video, because we had it's most recent springtime investment. I can't talk about it yet. It's not final. It'll be final when it's wired, which should be after this video. But
congratulations!
But specifically, this founder and I talked about enterprise sales for a while, and this is great advice. And so I have my own opinions on it, but I'm only one person, and you have a tremendous amount of experience both on both sides on all three sides of the table now, if you will, from
all the perspectives.
All the perspectives, absolutely, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic, Allie. It's always so awesome to hang with you. I can't wait till we can do this in person someday.
I know.
2021.
One day.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Totally.
Fingers crossed.
Totally.
Banking on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So if folks want to find you and reach out to you, what's the best way for startups to engage with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So definitely find me on LinkedIn. I'm also super active on Twitter. My handle is Allie_Schneider. And then happy to share email addresses as well, both E-Trade and personal email addresses, whatever people prefer to contact me at. At E-Trade, I'm just allison.schneider@etrade.com.
There you go. All right. Awesome. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching today. Don't forget that Monday we kick off the Startup of the Year Summit, the 8th annual summit, when we will name the Startup of the Year from our 1,000 applications that we narrow down to a top 100. And then we narrow that down to 15 and then a final 5, and then pick the Startup of the Year. We also have a special award for the .us Veteran Startup of the Year Award, and so proud to be supporting veteran founders. It's that in the .us, and the people at .us are passionate about this as well. And so they are offering a free .us domain to anybody that wants one. And so I can put that link as well. But that's all we've got time for today. So thank you, everybody. And we'll see you on Monday at Startup of the Year Summit.
It's going to be fun.
Woohoo.
Thanks so much, Rich.
Thanks for being here, Allie.
Take care.